Hello, I'm Mariana Cordier. Welcome to Montgomery Weekend Review. The indictments of numerous parents who paid a California college advisor to increase their children's test scores, create fake athletic resumes, and even pay college coaches to recommend non-athletes for admissions has made the news in recent weeks. Shu Ping Chan, an attorney, has this story. The state legislative session is almost over, but the legislators are working hard to put money into the budget to begin funding the Kirwan report, which outlines a new vision for the public education in Maryland. James Koutsos, the president of Montgomery County Association of Administrators and Principals, MECAP, will tell us what will happen first and what the future holds. The County Council recently received a report from the Office of Legislative Oversight on the impact of poverty on after-school elementary programs. Jane DeWinter, who comments on this program, will review the report. The April Beacon has its usual articles about our health and well-being that are of interest to all of us. Stuart Rosenthal, the editor and publisher of the Beacon, will report. Well, thank you for coming to the show. It's been a while since we've been on the show together. How are you doing?
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for having me back. I'm doing fine, thank you.
So there's all these stories in the news about whether their children are on the rowing team, whether they're athletes, whether they get into Yale and all these schools. What's going on?
It's absolutely unbelievable. You like to think ideally that access to higher education is a level playing field, there's fairness and equality for everybody, but apparently not so much, as some critics would say. As you heard in the news recently, about 50 people got indicted, including a number of well-known celebrities from, who star in a lot of TV shows, got indicted, and a couple of people pled guilty, saying there's a big scam nationwide. Basically, you pay somebody to either doctor your child's photographs, saying that they're a real competitive athlete when they're not. You pay somebody to take your SAT or ACT scores test for you. And what I find especially insulting is that some parents pay a doctor or a psychologist to have their child name them as someone who has a learning difference, a learning disability, so that they get more accommodations, so that they can take the exams by themselves and then have someone go in there and take the exams for them. I mean, that's a real insult to the families who have legitimate, whose kids have legitimate learning differences. And I think that's just a shame. Some people have pled guilty already.
I have a question. I thought in most of these universities, especially the ones that have legacy students and whatnot, they don't mind selling places on their class. They just expect big donations or whatever from these people. So why did these people have to go all the way around backwards? If they had that kind of money, couldn't they just go to the school and say, $1 million?
They could have done the legitimate bribery, so to speak, to donate the $50 million to build the building.
Library.
Well, I mean, what I heard was that this was catching people who didn't have the $50 million to donate.
Okay.
The straight donation, the value, you have to, that costs a lot more now. So this was sort of like middle people.
Middle of the road. So 50 people got indicted, including the head coach, the former head coach of the Yale women's soccer team, who said that this applicant was a soccer player. They doctored up some photographs showing that, put her face on someone else's body, playing soccer or rowing.
So they couldn't get
bribes.
her to just dress up anyway in a soccer outfit? I mean, it's amazing.
It's almost comical if it wasn't so serious and such a bad story.
I was surprised that a number of people who were on the staff at colleges, whether they were coaches or whatever, they had national reputations. I mean, is there any indication why it is that all of a sudden they're going to just start taking money?
I don't know.
I mean, that's very baffling to me.
I don't know. I mean, $400,000 is a lot of money, and the coach, took that. So I really don't know why that is. But it says something about, the power of money and the need to get into a prestigious school. And I think, there was that story from India maybe about 5 or 6 years ago where parents were climbing up the outside of a building to sneak in crib sheets to their students who were taking a standardized test. I mean, I assume they had no other opportunity. But here in the United States, there's so many other opportunities. You don't have to get into the Harvard, the Yale, every single.
But will they make it so that, and I think that's part of the problem. There are, for instance, in law, I'm a lawyer, You see the law firms will only take Harvard grads, will only take Yale grads, and they're the higher paid places.
Right.
They create that environment, that need, and it's almost like we shouldn't allow those kinds of monopolies to take place.
But that's a very limited view, that you have to get into that top tier New York or California law firm to make the $300,000 as a first year associate. There are many more opportunities to do good, have a great career without having to go through the Harvard, Yales, and go into that law
But this
firm.
is an example, I think, of people trying to leverage economic, social, and cultural capital, just like Pedro Noguera talked about in Unfinished Business. It comes down also to race, and people
Yes, it
feeling
does.
as though they have privilege
Yes.
and trying to exercise that privilege through economic, social, or cultural means. And it's really a disastrous situation.
And you tie that into the lawsuit against Harvard University filed by a number of Asian American families. Well, they're used as props by this very anti-affirmative action person who started the Texas case and now has the Harvard case, trying to get rid of affirmative action based on race. So yes, that ties right in.
And what's happening to the kids, the students?
You have 10 seconds.
One student actually whose parent paid like $1.2 million got disenrolled, got kicked out of school. And some might be prosecuted, some might not, depending on how much knowledge they have. So it's going to cause a lot of problems for the schools and for the families.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and I hope you'll come back again.
Thank you, Diane.
All right, so now to the Kirwan report. I mean, I know this has been buzzing all around the state, has to do with the budgeting with the schools. Tell us what's going on, James.
Well, here we are coming to the close of the session, and there's a lot of effort being put forward to bring this to closure and to fund a lot of the recommendations of the Kirwan Commission. They're not going to be able to get to everything that's in those recommendations. But in essence, what legislators are doing in conjunction with various stakeholders is trying to build a bridge to Kirwan by putting some short-term funding in to the FY20 budget. But then there was also an article in the Baltimore Sun recently that talked about how there's a 2-year agreement that's been reached to fund as much as over $300 million. The Senate passed it 43-1, and it's in the House for
So
further
I'll ask the
amendment.
question that probably most of my audience is asking.
Sure.
Is like, well, how much is Montgomery County going to get, and how's that work?
So I know that the state and the legislators are looking at various formulas to try to determine how to equitably distribute that money across various jurisdictions within the state. Right now for FY20, it appears as though if things pass, Montgomery County could get as much as $24 million to be spread across a variety of priorities. The 3 priorities that the legislators are looking at through Kirwan is pre-K education, so funding for students prior to coming to K through 12 institutions. They're looking at community schools, ways to help areas in poverty with additional resources for students and families. And they're also looking to boost teacher salaries. There's a desire to ensure that we have quality educators in schools and that we're able to retain them, because too often teachers after 5 years or within that 5-year window of starting are leaving the profession or choosing not to go into teacher education preparation programs.
That's a big deal, because without those teachers, we can't really have as much impact to the students.
No, where student achievement happens is in the classroom, and it's that relationship that students have with teachers and what they're bringing to the table on a daily basis.
To put the, so that you were mentioning like 250 to 300 million, are there any estimates of what it would cost to fully fund Kirwan from the outset?
So there has been some discussion, and there have been hefty numbers that have been put out there to
Yeah.
fully fund the entire process. $3.8 billion over 10 years is the type of money we're talking about. Now again, this is over time, it's phased in, and we have to look at a variety of resources and funding sources. Everything from the legalization of marijuana to sports betting to taxes for online commerce are being looked at as possible funding sources. But I think we also have to remember that we do need to raise salaries for teachers, but there are other employees in the system that help students: supporting services, paraeducators, building service workers, administrators. All those individuals need their compensation to be considered in this process as well, and Kirwan's a little silent on that.
So will the state legislators actually identify exactly how each dollar has to be used, or is it just given as a lump sum to a jurisdiction?
It is looked at in a variety of categories. Special education is one of the categories. Obviously, things that are going to go into possible wellness centers for families and students for better health opportunities. So yes, I think the legislature will have a very strong say in it. And the governor has already weighed in because he wanted an inspector general for Maryland State Education for further accountability, and that's been rolled into the most recent amendment to the Kirwan Commission legislation.
James, can you elaborate on the concept of community schooling in the MCPS public system?
So community schools are in place in a variety of areas across the nation, and really the goal is to better understand what the needs are in high poverty areas of families, whether it's health issues, whether it's homelessness, whether it's hunger. And so the community schools legislation calls for a community schools coordinator that would work and liaison between the community and the school itself to build a community action plan that could decide how they would help schools and help families be successful in that environment.
Is that taking place now already?
That is, well, interesting you mentioned that, because I think in many of our schools we do have some of the components that would be in the legislation. For example, we have health and wellness centers in Gaithersburg Elementary, Watkins Mill High School, and other schools like that. We do conduct family markets and have for a number of years now in the Kennedy cluster, for example, where families are able to come and access food. So we have linkages to learning. We have a lot of services that we provide to families that is aligned with what's being called for in the community schools legislation.
Great.
That's great. And with regard to this is the first I had heard of the Inspector General in about a minute that we have left. How is the reaction of educators around the state of Maryland of having someone perhaps inspecting and reviewing what's going on? And
well, from what I've read about the governor's priority there, it's to ensure that there's not fraud and waste. You know, when we have, you know, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of taxpayer money funding various school systems, we want to make sure that that funding is used wisely and used appropriately to benefit children.
Is the governor,
so I think that's the focus.
Is he sort of concerned about specific jurisdictions that you know might be more prone to that, or
great,
you know,
Jane, put him on the spot.
That's an excellent question. I think overall what's been shared is that there's a focus and a renewed focus on accountability.
Okay.
And
we'll
I think
have
the
to leave
governor's
it there because we're
been
running out of
focused on
time.
that.
That's really interesting.
Indeed.
I hope you'll come back and tell us more about it.
Be happy to. Thank you.
We have to take a break. Be right back. And we're back. So Jane, I know this is a tough topic when we're talking about poverty in the schools and such, but what is this about the enrichment program?
Okay, well, so the county has, in the county council, is Office of Legislative Oversight, and they study issues at the request of county council members. And so they've been conducting a study. This is the third in a series over the last 4 years, and specifically looking at what kinds of programs, and they're talking about after-school programs, are in elementary schools, and specifically looking at what are the differences between high-poverty schools and schools with, you know, much less or almost no poverty, or kids, you know, receiving free reduced lunch. So they first started by just counting, you know, the number of rooms that have been rented through the county reservation system, and they did find a very strong correlation that, you know, for schools with very low rates of poverty, there were so many more programs as measured by the number of rooms, classrooms rented after school, compared to, I mean, more than 3 to 4 times as many on average.
So that would be equating something like, you know, 6 to 7 programs in schools maybe in Chevy Chase as opposed to maybe 1 or 2 in Silver Spring?
Exactly, and in some places, I mean, I'm sort of just talking about average, but there was a much larger variance, you know, at some schools. I mean, it is true in parts of the county where the rate of poverty is very low, kids may have the option or, you know, choices of 5, 7, 9, or 10 different after-school programs right at their own school.
And we're talking
every
about
single
art,
day.
music.
Right, art, music, robotics, other sciences. Yeah, exactly. Lego. It's amazing.
So the parents of these children were paid for them to go after school through some other outside program.
And so at some of these schools, Burning Tree, Wood Acres, Bradley Hills, I mean, parents might be paying $250 for 8 one-hour after-school
Right.
classes, and clearly that's outside the range of.
Did the report take into consideration any of the school-based programs, ones that have been established by the schools themselves through MCPS, or did it look exclusively at vendors who go through community use of
They
public
looked
facilities?
exclusively at reservations through the system. So it is true that, for example, I know a number of schools have maybe one club day a week where teachers are running clubs, and teachers are getting a small stipend, and usually the clubs are free or very, very nominal. Since the school doesn't have to reserve its own classrooms, no, those aren't counted.
Right.
But one thing that is counted, that they did count, and they focused a lot about it in the committee meeting, was on child care associations. There are about 7 or 8 major businesses that do child care and have sites at multiple schools. But there also are some schools that don't have a child care on site, and that tends to be schools where parents just aren't going to have the money to.
So now that the report is out, what do you think the council's next step is for them to act on it?
Well,
What would you like to
Right, as somebody who runs a program doing enrichment, foreign language and STEM, I thought they were going to focus more on enrichment. I always think of enrichment as when you have a child, like someone's delivering content to the child, which is different than child care, not to diminish child care, but the focus is really not so much on enrichment. They are looking at just basically the availability of a safe place where kids can be after school, and so I think that they are planning to add a couple of sites, or try to add a couple of sites to this program called Elementary Excel Beyond the Bell, where they're in 6 schools right now with a very intensive 4 or 5 afternoon-a-week program, and then they also may be looking at increasing sites. The rec department runs a few places, programs off-site where kids are bused there, and then it's kind of like some child care elements and a little bit of enrichment elements. So they're looking at funding those larger things, as opposed to really trying to figure out how to deliver more content to kids, which to me was disappointing.
Has there been any discussion around, I know, more and more the discussion is around mental health and well-being. How about anything around mindfulness or things that may help across the county, children that may be struggling with challenges associated with mental health?
So you have 30 seconds.
Right. Well, and actually one of the people on the panel to answer questions was Monica Martin of Linkages to Learning. And a comment by the council member, Monica had to correct them and say that there have been no additional sites added to Linkages for 5 years or more. And so I was interested in hearing about the Kirwan about wellness, because we do have great programs, but there are a lot more places that could use them.
All right, and that's the final word. Very important stuff, and it seems like Montgomery County is going to see a lot in the education area. So let's talk about health and wellness, Stuart. Although earlier you told me now we're measuring our calories differently.
Well, it's nice news, I think. Tell me if you think it is or not.
My question is, what about chocolate?
Chocolate
Can I eat all the chocolate I
Chocolate is
want?
good for you. I'll leave it at that. That's not what the article is about. But the point is, we've been taught, or we think we've been taught, that calories are all the same. Well, if I'll substitute this Snickers bar, then I won't have that salad or whatever. But it's not really the way it works. It turns out because our bodies have to process the food that we eat. And not only do certain kinds of foods take longer to process and burn more calories, like protein burns 25% more calories than fat or carbohydrates, but also the form in which we eat our food affects how hard the body has to work to digest the nutrients. So if we eat raw carrots versus cooked carrots, it's a difference. If you eat juice, if you drink juice rather than having the fruit, it's a difference. And it's because all that work has been done for you and the body doesn't have to go to the energetic effort to break it down. So I thought it's an interesting way to look at what we eat.
So that I understand, is it better to eat the raw carrot?
The raw
than the
is
juice?
better than the juice. The raw is better than the cooked. The whole is better than the juiced. And actually, less cooked is better than more cooked. So if you like sushi, you're going to hold on to less calories of that fish than if you have it cooked.
So it sounds
Especially
like,
if you get a tapeworm.
sounds like the bottom line is less processed food.
Less processed.
The better for
Right.
you.
And the same is true of whole grains versus white rice, that kind of
Sugars.
thing. They did a study where they gave people the same calories per day, but one had whole grains and brown rice, and one had refined grains and white rice. And the group that had the whole grains burned 100 calories more per day than the others, which adds up to like a pound a month.
So are you saying that smoothie maker that my daughter purchased that we use all the time now may not have been the best investment?
Well, if she uses it for fruit, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, but it'd be better to have the fruit fresh.
Or maybe add protein to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's a good idea.
Usually there's kale mixed in there, so that's
Oh, I'm sure.
that's,
it's
I'm
fine.
sure that's a
Sounds
good,
yummy.
a good
Good,
choice.
good.
I don't know about the kale is yummy, but so what other articles do you have?
Well, okay, here's another thing that's sort of counterintuitive. Disinfectants. People have been told, we have to disinfect, get rid of those bacteria. Let's use antibacterial soap. Let's use everything, get everything clean for our kids. Actually, that's causing our kids all kinds of trouble because there are lots of bacteria that are both on our body and in our bodies that we need to survive. Our gut has an important amount of bacteria that helps break down our food. They have discovered that in homes that are especially squeaky clean and use antibacterial soaps, kids as young as 3 are obese because they don't have the bacteria in their gut that's needed to really process the food. So, it's people have gone overboard with the cleanliness
Well,
thing.
and that's really interesting because that's a separate point because I've heard things about that whole thing with cleanliness explaining why so many kids have allergies,
Yeah, that
like
too.
serious
Right.
allergies.
Right,
So
right.
this is a whole nother.
It's a different article.
So
yeah.
maybe at a younger age, you build an immune system. If there's totally everything's
Every
squeaking
child
clean.
needs a pet chicken.
Okay.
Or a pet.
Well, actually, the federal HHS actually had a program that sort of provided education for families to say you should not be overly using disinfectants
Yes,
all
exactly.
the time.
That's what this is about,
Yeah.
right? So this article also has a sidebar where it gives you some recipes to make your own cleaning products that are not too strong, that'll be useful and work well, but will not be dangerous to you and your family.
It sounds like what my grandmother, my yaya, used to tell me all the time, everything in moderation.
Yes. Right.
Rather than going full bore on
Right.
it's got to be this, it's got to be that.
Good old soap and water is just
When I
fine.
go over to my brother's house and he has a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, I think they need to clean more.
Oh, well, that's
because you come out of there with a flu or a virus
that's
or
different.
something,
That's
no matter
different.
what.
That's different. So we have a very interesting money story as well. You know about these college 529 plans. You can put money into these accounts for your grandchildren, typically, or children, and then as they grow up, the money earns interest and whatnot, and then when you withdraw the money, you don't have to pay tax on the interest. All of it was tax-free for use in college's education. What I didn't know is you can do the same thing for yourself as an adult or an older adult. In fact, if you have money left over in your grandkids' account that they didn't use, you can use it for yourself. As long as you are doing lifelong education, you're going back to school, you're getting a degree, you're learning something important, you can use this money and you get a state tax deduction in Maryland, D.C., or Virginia. All 3 states allow a state tax deduction on money that's put into these accounts.
Well, I think that would be particularly interesting for those people that are in careers like police, fire, that they retire early and then they have to find a new career because it's too early and
Right.
who knows if their
But even if
benefits
you-
will stretch out.
Even if you retire at 70 and you just want to go
Right.
back to school and learn art or whatever, you can go to Montgomery College, you can go to a college, you can study anything you want. You can put money directly, you can open an account for yourself, put the money in, take a deduction that year, and spend it on classes that year.
That's great.
It just
And
saves you the money on
And a lot of people are seeking professional certifications in various areas. I'm
Absolutely.
assuming you could use it for that purpose as well.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Well, I think the law allows that you can change the beneficiary of the 529 at least
Exactly,
once a year.
exactly,
So you can change
right.
it to you, your
Right.
spouse, or your other brother, sister, whatever.
right.
And I'm going to go to cooking school in a few years.
All
After
right.
after my son goes to college.
You'll have to do a sample for us.
I'll be happy to bring it
But
up.
make sure you use the brown rice, not
That's
the white
right.
rice, because we need to burn those calories. Well, in the last 30 seconds, any other stories that you want?
Well, this month, our May issue, we have our April issue, we have our housing and home care options pull-out section. So anybody's interested in either moving and looking how to save money on the move or where to go to, or they want to just stay in their homes and make it, remodel it, or keep it safe for them. We have all different kinds of stories about these topics in our housing
And
section.
didn't you also have a resource guide?
Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. The 2019 Montgomery County Seniors Resource Guide is out and available. You'll find it in drugstores and libraries free of charge.
Awesome. So don't forget the resource guide. Thank you all for joining me here today, and thank you for joining all of us for this week's edition of Montgomery Weekend Review. I'm Mariana Cordier. Please join us next week for at this same time. Thank you.